everyone, and welcome to our Chapter 7 lecture video for our CIS 2131 course, Python Programming. Apologies if I sound a little bit under the weather, because I am a little bit, but hopefully it is not too distracting for this lecture. Also, apologies, this lecture may not be as long as the other ones, because again, I'm not feeling the greatest, but I did want to at least record something for you guys here. So I've just put together a few slides here, just talking about files and some of the things that are talked about in this week's chapter. So we can go ahead and jump right in. So why do files matter? Well, up until now, our program runs and variables live in memory, but when the program ends, our data disappears, right? But with files, data can persist, programs can process large data sets, and real-world data becomes usable, right? So first things first, we should look at how to open a file, right? So Python uses the built-in open function, and here I have some code that shows using the open function. And what this does is it returns a file handle. It does not read the file yet, and it creates a connection to the file. Okay, so we have a variable named fhand. This is short for file handle, and we are trying to open the mbox.txt file. And do note that if the file doesn't exist, then you will get an error. Okay, so what is a file handle? You can think of a file handle like a remote control for the file or a pointer to data on disk, but do note that it is not the file itself. So reading a file, right? The most common way to read a file is to loop through it, right? So we have our same line of code where we open the file here, and then we say for line in fhand print line. And what this does is this reads the file one line at a time. And it's very efficient for large files, and it does include new line characters. And you could also use this to count lines in a file, right? So we could have a counter variable outside of the loop, and inside of the loop, we could just increase the count by 1 every time it iterates through the loop, and then you'd be able to count how many lines are in the file. And then sometimes you may want to read an entire file at once, right? So you can read an entire file at once using .read, the .read function, okay? And what this does is it reads the entire file into one string, okay? And this is good for small files, but it can be very dangerous for large ones. So for large ones, I would recommend looping through the file, and for smaller files, you could use the read function here. And we can also search through files using for loops, right? So we can use starts with and find. These are both string methods, right? They're methods of the string class. And starts with will select only the lines that start with the provided string, right? So starts with will open and close parentheses, and we can provide a string. And then it will check every line to see if it starts with that string. And if it does, then it will go ahead and do whatever's inside of the if statement that you're using. And then for find will look for the provided string in the line and return the position of it, right? So again, you can provide a string to find, and it will return the position of it as long as it is in the line. And we can also strip white space right at the end of a line. So to strip white space at the end of a line, we can use .rstrip, that function. And what this does is it not only removes trailing white space, but it also removes new line characters, okay? Another keyword we can use is the in keyword. So we can use it for searching. So for instance, if we had a line that said if, and then in quotation marks, we had the word from in line, then it's going to look for this provided string in this string line, right? So this is another way that we can use the keyword in for searching. It's another way that we can search in our files. Another handy thing we can do is we can actually prompt the user for the file name, right? So this helps. Well, I'll talk about it in a minute, but you can prompt the user to enter a file name, and this actually makes your program reusable for multiple files, right? Because we're not just hard coding the file name that we want to be looking at. We can actually enter the file name, and that allows us to work with multiple files and look at the different files. So we have a variable named fname here, and we're just getting input from the user about the file name. And then when we go to get our file handle, we'll actually open the fname variable that was provided by the user, right? But when we do something like this, we do need to handle bad file names, right? So if we have the user entering file names, then we need to handle potential bad file names. And what we should do is we should put our line of code that opens the file in a try block, okay? And then in an accept block of code, we should print an error and quit. And this helps handle any errors that may occur if the user enters a file name that doesn't exist or is just a bad file name, one that would throw an exception, basically. We can handle that exception. Not only can we read files, but we can also write files, right? So in order to do this, we need to open the file in write mode. I have an example line here, and then we write to the file, such as here. So in quotation marks here, the comma, and then putting W in quotation marks, this is how we write to the file, or if the file already exists, we overwrite the file. So if the file doesn't exist, it creates this file right here. And if this file already exists, then it overwrites this file right here. Okay. And then we can use our variable name.write, and we can write to the file. And then we also need to know how to close a file, right? So to close a file, we use one simple line of code, and it's just we use this .close function here, and that's how we can close a file. Why should you close files? Well, one, it flushes the buffer, it releases system resources, and it's just best practice, right? And do know that files are automatically closed when the program ends, but professionals always close files explicitly. So I would recommend, and it is best practice to always close your files when you're done using them and not just let the program do it when the program ends, right? Um, and here there's a few different modes that we can use when we're working with files. So R, right, is read mode, and this is the default. So that's what we were kind of working with at the beginning of the slides there. W is write or overwrite mode, right? So if the file doesn't exist, it's write. And if the file does exist, then it overwrites the file. A is append mode, and RB is read binary mode. And read and write will probably be more commonly used than the others, but they are available. And what are some real world applications of using files, right? So files are used for log analysis, for email parsing, for data science, for CSV processing, and for configuration files. Some common beginner mistakes, excuse me. Forgetting R strip, right? Forgetting to use that to get rid of either new lines or trailing white space. Using read for big files, right? We want to loop through big files and use read for smaller files. Not handling bad file names, right? If there's a bad file name, your program will throw an exception and crash. We don't want that. So handling the potential for bad file names is extremely important. And then indentation errors inside loops or just in general. Python's a little bit different than other languages, so indentation really matters. So that's just another common beginner mistake that can happen, especially when working with loops. So yeah, this is the end of the lecture. I know that this lecture is a little bit shorter. You'll have to excuse me for that. But I didn't want to record nothing for you guys. So hopefully just going over some of these and reinforcing some of these ideas that you learned through the reading is helpful just to hear out loud. after, doing the reading of the chapter and listening to this lecture, you should understand how to open a file using open, how to read a file line by line, right, through looping, how the difference between read and looping, right, the read function and looping, why rstrip is important, how to search within a file, how to write to a file, and also how to handle bad file names. But that's really all for this lecture. Again, sorry that this one's so short. The next lecture shouldn't be so short because I will be feeling better by then. But yeah, hopefully you guys understood a lot of what was talked about in this reading. It was kind of just the basics of working with files, so nothing too crazy. But yeah, go ahead and reach out to me if you have any questions. I'll be able to hopefully explain anything better if you need. And that'll be all for this lecture. So I'll see you guys in the next one.